This week on Getting to Know Jew, we talk with Ken Sonnenschein and Brenda Ruppel. Both are involved in the Kansas City Mitzvah Garden, where Sonnenschein is a co-founder and chairperson, and Ruppel is the garden and farm coordinator. So we chat about everything from trees to bees and, of course, Judaism. Ken and Brenda, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So just to start out, the Mitzvah Garden. I'm sure there are many people who already know what that is, but for those who may not know, can you say a little bit about what is the Mitzvah Garden and how did it come to be?
So the Mitzvah Garden is a project of the Jewish community of Kansas City that started, depending on how one understands the history, some long time ago, where there was an opportunity and encouragement to figure out a way to use the grounds of Jewish communal institutions to do more than grow grass that needs to be perpetually mowed. So the idea was, instead of having large areas of grass, perhaps changing some of that area into agricultural land. So the garden grew from some humble beginnings of 640 square feet on the grounds of Village Shalom. And then in 2010, expanded onto the grounds of the Temple Congregation B'nai Yehuda, where it became a 10,000 square foot garden. And then subsequently has grown over these past 13 seasons to now being 64,000 square feet, where the produce that's raised, which is our goal, is 10,000 pounds of produce a year. And all that produce is donated to food access agencies, or what are sometimes called food pantries, around the Kansas City Metro.
I'd also love to hear more about your sustainability efforts, because from my understanding, the garden is sort of entirely self-sufficient with energy and water, right?
That's right. So one of the things because of the location of the garden, we are located far from the building. And because of that, we really don't have convenient access to anything, any electricity, any water. And as the garden grew, there was a challenge of how to irrigate the garden. So we, first of all, needed water. So we built a pavilion of our pole barn that's 30 feet by 40 feet. And Brenda's husband, David Ruppel, created a plumbing system to connect 22 300-gallon wire totes or plastic bins. And so that allowed us 6,600 gallons of water. And we have a solar system, a solar panel with batteries and an inverter and a computer-controlled charge system, thanks to Peter Loftspring, and getting a grant from Kansas City Power and Light. So that provided us with the electricity. And then David designed a system that has a pump that pressurizes the plumbing that then is delivered to, the water is then delivered to the garden using Israeli-made drip irrigation technology. So the system is a completely off-grid system, and we have plenty of electricity for doing other things. We have solar-powered music. We've had solar-powered latke making. We've had solar-powered onion rings. We have solar-powered smoothies.
Is this like you hook up an electric oven or something to the grid that you have, and then that's how you cook all this stuff?
Correct, right, exactly. So because the solar panels generate electricity and we store it in the batteries, we have an AC inverter that we can plug appliances into and have all this solar-powered stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. Used to be where Ken would have to, start up his little camp stove, and he would cook for us. I never had chard before, and then he would cook up the chard, and it was delicious. Yeah, super fun. But now we're all modern.
I'm curious to just sort of throw in this question. How is the garden dealing with the effects of climate change? Because you've obviously grown a lot over the past couple of years, but also the environment is sort of drastically changing around us. What's sort of that part of the situation like for the garden?
Well, so one of the big thing in terms of climate response, as it's called, or as I understand it's called, because no longer because the problem with climate change is it makes it seem like something that is happening to us. And climate response is, I think, an important focus of how we respond to what's going on. And one of the things is that we know that there are increased intensity and increased duration of micro droughts. So these are periods of time that can be anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks in Kansas City that we get zero precipitation. And so this water capture, storage, and delivery system that we have, and by the way, it's called Project Matar. And that's because the Hebrew word matar is a word that means nourishing rain, as contrasted with geshem, which is more of could be a torrential rain. And what we pray for in our regular morning and evening prayers is we pray for matar. Anyway, so that's why it's called Project Matar. And so what this does is, because, of course, when it's raining regularly, we don't need to irrigate, but then we're storing up that rain, like even now, with all the rain we've had in the last 10 days, we're storing all that rainwater. So as of this moment, we have over 5,000 gallons of water stored. So when the droughts come, we then use that stored water to still be able to irrigate. So that's one thing. There's some things we can't change. So for instance, we are having warmer winters, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have later last frosts. So the last frost in Kansas City is still in late April, but our fruit trees bloom in late March or early April. And so the problem is if you have fruit trees that bloom and then a frost comes, it can kill all the blossoms and wipe out the fruit production.
Oh, that happened to us last year with our fruit-bearing trees. When I see our fruit trees, the little buds on our fruit trees freeze away, and we're just not going to have any fruit. And that's kind of sad for me. It's sad for everybody, because we do produce a tremendous amount of fruit up there. So hopefully this year it won't happen. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed.
But that's something we have zero control over, that if a late frost comes, there's really nothing we can really do. Brenda, maybe say something about the mason bees.
Oh, the mason bees. They're still in my refrigerator, Ken. I'm going to bring them to the garden. I just worry that it's too cold for them. So I'm going to bring them to the garden on Sunday, and we will be releasing them. So right now I've got like a Tupperware container full of these little mason bee cocoons in my refrigerator. Last year, I'm telling you what, they hatched in my refrigerator, but thank God I had a cover over them and I was able to get them to the garden in the nick of time. But they are great little pollinators, and they are the cutest little bee. And they're just nice bees. They don't sting you. And then they just go around the garden and pollinate. It's great. It's a lot of fun.
And do you bulk order bees? Where do you get them?
No, originally we got them from a supplier in California, but they reproduce. And then, like Brenda was saying, in the fall, what we do is the cocoons are made in paper straws. There are tubes, and we put paper straws in the tubes, and then the mason bees, they make a little pile of pollen, and then they put a little drop of a kind of honey that they make, and then they lay their egg, and then they seal it off with clay. And that's why they're called mason bees. And they do this over and over and over again. So the tube fills up with these little chambers, and then when the bee hatches, it creates a cocoon, and then, like Brenda said, she harvests all those cocoons and actually separates them even by gender.
Yeah, and you can tell the difference between the female and the male. The male cocoon is considerably larger than the female. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And then they so all these bees, the males hatch first, and then as soon as the females hatch, then the males fertilize the females, and then they make more. And so each year, how many cocoons do you have, Brenda?
Oh boy, I'll bet you I got about 100, maybe more. There's a lot.
And in addition to mason bees, we also have Italian honeybees, and we harvest honey in the summer that we then distribute through the synagogue gift shops in Kansas City, primarily B'nai Yehuda and Beth Shalom, but also Beth Torah. And actually, now thanks to Katie White, we're also distributing through Katie White and the Kosher Food Co-op just in time for Pesach.
So I also want to back up a moment and ask a little about, for both of you, your Jewish backgrounds and identities and how that sort of, culminated with your involvement with this garden, sort of ties in with that. So just sort of a brief background from both of you would be interesting to hear, like the Jewish aspect of this for you.
Well, I converted to Judaism. So for me, this garden is a fantastic way to get to know the Jewish community that I've, joined. It's been tremendous. I don't think without this garden, I would have as many friends as I do. It's just fantastic. And the people up there are so kind. It's been tremendous. So, yeah. And when I'm up there, Ken is really, really good about giving us Torah study. It's fantastic. Every Sunday morning, we meet at the pavilion and he'll teach us. It's wonderful. And I've heard, like, from some of our volunteers that this garden is the way that they identify with their Jewishness.
And Brenda, maybe say a little bit about the garden and how you came to affiliate with the synagogue.
Oh, right. Well, I started going to services and I would read in the bulletin that this mitzvah garden, needed people to water. And I thought, well, I can certainly do that. So that's how I started. Every night I'd go up after work and I would, hook the hose up to the building and run the hose up the hill and water away. And then I noticed that, you know what? This garden has some weeds. I bet I could deal with those. So I started doing that. And then it just got great. And then I started to learn everything about the garden and how to plant stuff. And I even got a job as a result of this garden, working at a greenhouse. Became the seeder. So I would, seed and grow all the plants that we planted at the garden. It's a really cool thing.
Yeah, so that was through Kansas City Community Gardens, so we're connected with them and Cultivate KC and the Giving Grove. So we have a verse from Torah that's at the entrance to the pavilion, which is, when you reap the harvest of your fields, you should leave the gleanings and the corners of your field for the poor and the stranger. And so this is one of our 613 mitzvot that actually is repeated several times in Torah about the idea that we have a responsibility to provide food for people. And the reason why it talks about the fields and the corners and the gleanings is that if you were either poor or if you were a stranger, that is, if you had come to the community and didn't grow up in that community, or you were a widow, you wouldn't have land. And without land in the ancient world, you don't have access to food. And so this concept of using the land that we have and growing food, because of course here in Overland Park, most families are not producing their food on their land. And so we become the corners of everybody's field so that people can come together and grow food. And I think that this, the people coming and working and learning together and meeting each other and forming community feels deeply Jewish in terms of community, in terms of connection, in terms of doing mitzvot, doing tikkun olam. And so all of these things happen in the space of the garden.
So I also want to kind of poke at that a little bit, because a community garden can be sort of great with or without sort of any Jewish element. So what's, if you can say a little bit more, what's so good or important about having specifically a Jewish community garden in Kansas City?
Well, first of all, it says in the Talmud, a person who is Jewish is forbidden from living in a city that doesn't have a garden. And so we're all good because we have the garden. And so we're fulfilling that Talmudic directive. And what I really try to do is every week think about the Parsha from the week, or think about a holiday or some kind of connection. And like Brenda said, I then bring that and some intentional discussion about what Judaism and Jewish texts have to say about agriculture, farming, food insecurity, poverty, marginalization in the community, and intentionally talking about this. And also we do things like during Elul, we blow shofar every Sunday morning during the month of Elul. When our apple trees have their apples and our bees have produced honey for Rosh Hashanah, we dip apples in honey. For Hanukkah, we have a latke festival. So in the cold of winter, we fire up the skillet and make latkes. So we have the 7 species growing, which are the 7 species. In the Torah, it says, when you enter the land, it will be a land of wheat and barley, olives, dates, pomegranates, figs, and dates. So we talk about that. Every aspect of the 3 harvest festivals, we talk about this idea that the Jewish calendar is really an agricultural calendar. Pesach being the first of the harvest festivals, it is the barley festival, the barley harvest, and then Shavuot being the wheat harvest, and then Sukkot being the ingathering of the species, where all these different kinds of fruits and vegetables come ripe and are brought in. And it's one of the reasons why we would live in booths, because people would go out into their fields and they would set up temporary housing so that they could harvest in the field and then gather the harvest and bring it back to their homes and towns. So these are the kinds of things that we talk about to make it an intentionally Jewish garden.
And what's it like also being a bridge with other communities? Because I've read that, you've gotten help from some Kansas City gardening organizations and getting things off the ground. And in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd sparked protests against police violence and racism across the country, you started more outreach work to bring people together at the garden. I believe I read a story about that from 2020. So, what's that been like in that element of the garden?
We're doing everything we can to try to have diversity of every kind in the garden, both diversity of the species that we grow, but also diversity of the people who come and help and visit. Certainly, we have interfaith activities that go on. A very dedicated volunteer, Vivian Broussard, is a member of the Seventh-day Adventist community. And because Seventh-day Adventists also have Saturday as their Sabbath, their food pantry is open on Sunday. So she comes and works in the garden and then takes the food directly to the food pantry. It also leads to some wonderful conversations about different ways of understanding the world through the lens of Judaism compared to Seventh-day Adventist. There's a Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, which is an intentional dialogue group of Muslim and Jewish women, have come up to volunteer. We're involved through Kansas City Community Gardens. We recently had a program teaching people about a kind of agriculture called hugel culture, which is where you layer the garden soil like the forest floor. And we did outreach to people from throughout the Kansas City Metro to encourage them to come and learn together. And so we had a lot of diversity there. We also dedicated a medicine wheel, which is part of American Indian spirituality and connected with the American Indian spirituality community of Kansas City. So we're trying to do what we can to really bring these different communities together because it's the right thing to do. And like you say, it was really the need for that kind of thing was really amplified by George Floyd's murder and everything that came from that.
Well, that medicine wheel, that means a lot to me. I've got a stepbrother who's Chippewa up in Minnesota. If he ever gets the opportunity to come down here, I would love to show him that. And I just recently learned that my niece is married to a Chippewa. They came down to visit us before our daughter's wedding. I really wanted to bring him to the garden but we had no time. We were busy with wedding stuff. But that medicine wheel really does mean a lot to me. I'm glad that we did that, Ken.
Sure. And I think, and again, I think it connects with a community that's an unseen minority within our community, with American Indians that are part of our community, but and of course are part of the history of the land that we use. And so this is our way of doing a very, very intentional land acknowledgement.
So the last question I have for the both of you is a classic on this podcast. What's your favorite part of the Kansas City Jewish community?
For me, it's the friends that I've made at the garden. Like I said earlier, I don't think that I would have made friendships like that, because we're all up there working, together and sharing stories about one another. And it's really a beautiful place.
Yeah, so I agree. I think that the great thing about the garden is it's a Jewish communal institution that literally has no walls. And so everyone can come in from whatever direction, whatever orientation, whatever conceptualization they have, and that it is like Abraham's tent, open on all sides, and everyone is invited to come and participate without any boundaries. And so I really love that reality of what the garden is. And I think it's lived up to that expectation in terms of every synagogue within the Kansas City community has had some sort of role to play, whether it's through their mitzvah day or through their Sunday school or through Hyman Brand Hebrew Academy is actively involved. So people have come up as part of their B'nai Mitzvah projects, as part of their Eagle Scout projects. So all of these different people within the Jewish community at every level of affiliation and no affiliation are involved in the garden.
The Getting to Know Jew podcast is a product of the Kansas City Jewish Chronicle and the Jewish Federation of Greater Kansas City. It is part of the Jewfolk Podcast Network and produced by Jewfolk Inc. Please rate, review, subscribe, and share. If you have suggestions for future guests, please email the show at webmaster@jewishkc.org.